Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Michelle Ingalls, and I'd like to welcome you to this first meeting of Spiritual Recovery, a metaphysical journey through the 12 steps. I've been thinking about doing this for a long time, and I've wanted to put together a group that explored the principles of 12-step recovery in kind of a fresh way, and to blend that perspective with a philosophy that I've been practicing for many years called the science of mind. Please don't confuse science of mind with Scientology or Christian Science or any other tradition or philosophy that has science in its name. It's none of those things. Science of mind is a metaphysical philosophy that's practical and applicable to everyday life, at least from my perspective. It was synthesized, that's the word he used, by a man named Ernest Holmes in the early 20th century. And he drew from both Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. And I have found it to be personally very valuable in my own life. And I really believe that it fits hand in glove with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm going to do a little bit longer presentation this evening than I will usually do, since it's our first meeting. In subsequent meetings, I'll present the step that we're working on that day, and a traditional and a metaphysical perspective of that step, and then we'll open things up for discussion. But I wanted to record and be able to post just the presentation itself without the discussion first. So I will do that for every meeting, by the way. So today I have a bit more to say, so it might be a little longer. So my purpose for putting this group together is to give people a place to kind of continue to explore what works for them in their individual recovery, to share ideas and to support each other, no matter where we happen to be on our personal journey. I do want to make it clear that I am not professing to be some kind of an expert. I'm on this journey of life, recovery, and transformation, just like you. You know, I'm also not here to make some grand promise about how great your life's going to be. It'll be just instantly fabulous. You know, there'll be rainbows, Care Bears, and unicorns. There is no smoke and mirrors in recovery or any kind of life transformation. For the most part, it's just about genuinely deciding you want to change and putting in the effort to create the change. You know, I just want to share with you what has worked for me and what I have discovered. Yeah, I truly believe that the 12 steps are based on solid principles, and when honestly applied, they kind of open the door to change and to a better life. However, once the door opens, that's when I believe metaphysics can be very useful, because metaphysics invites us to answer some really deep questions about what we believe about the nature and the purpose of life. You know, what's it all about? Why am I here? Why do I believe? What do I believe about a larger life, like God, spirit, the force, whatever we want to call it? You know, as Albert Einstein said, the most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or a hostile universe. We have to answer these questions. These are the questions that metaphysics invites us to be curious about and to explore. But metaphysics, and for me, this is the science of mind philosophy, but yeah, you have to decide what works for you. I can't do that. I can give you some resources. But metaphysics, for me, gives us some practical tools to support us in answering these important questions. And it's important that we know where we stand about what we believe. And of course, that is constantly evolving. It's never stagnant. And as someone who's been in recovery for 21 years this month, actually, I attribute my sobriety to both the 12 steps and to the spiritual principles of metaphysics. And although I have not been formally involved in a 12-step group for many years, I believe that I do practice the principles that the steps teach. And I see how they are grounded in the spiritual principles that I live my life by. So let me start by defining the terms I'm going to use. I'd like to define spiritual and metaphysics and addiction so that there's no confusion. So let's start with the word spiritual. When I use the word spiritual, I'm not talking about some mysterious force or power out there somewhere. I'm talking about the thing that animates life, the thing that is present when we're alive and gone when we're dead. You know, it's not some mysterious or unearthly force. It's all around us. It's in us. It is us. Sometimes we even use the word spirit as a replacement for the word God, but the word God is so highly charged that I tend not to use it very often. It has way too much baggage. When I say God, it brings up images of someone sitting in the clouds directing traffic, and that's not my personal understanding or experience of God. For me, spirit is clearer because we don't have to make sure we're not tripping over the limiting ideas we have about God. You know, and I'm not judging your definition or your experience of God, but the word can be confusing and a bit awkward. So spiritual for me is connecting with that life force, however we have come to experience it and define it. So metaphysics, usually we think of metaphysics as being beyond the physical. That's what the word breaks down to, meta, beyond, physics, the world of form. But metaphysics is actually a philosophy that deals with first principles. Aristotle said that he called it the relationship of universals to particulars. We might say the relationship of the creator to its creation. I'm talking about, when I use the word metaphysical, I'm talking about this universal intelligence and order. And this universal intelligence and order uses natural scientific laws in its relationships to the world of form. So everything we see and everything we experience is an expression of this form or this power that is beyond visible. So we're really talking about how the invisible life affects the visible world. So anyway, we can talk more about that later. I'm not going to get too deep into it. And I'd also like to make my understanding of addiction pretty clear. Usually we think of addiction as something like alcoholism, drug addiction, food, or an obsession with some behavior like gambling, sex, or work. We think of addiction as something that we drink or take or do, that we believe, something that we believe will make us feel better or relieve some discomfort, fill some void that we want to fill, even if it's only temporary. Often it's even an unconscious belief. We've just been enculturated to look outside ourselves to feel better. And of course, addiction is all of these things. But I think that we can broaden our definition of addiction to include any belief we have that there is something outside of ourselves, outside of our inner life, that will resolve the problems of our lives. Addiction is something that we'd like to stop doing, but we can't seem to do it. We may be able to stop or change for a short time, temporarily, and then we begin to repeat the pattern again and again. And recovery draws us back into a connection with the wholeness, we're talking spiritual again, that's already within us, our connection to life, or whatever name you want to give that presence. And through our participation with that life, that presence, force, power, we're able to transform from the inside out. And again, we can get a little deeper into the process of that as we go along through our weeks. Eckhart Tolle, who you're probably familiar with, says that addiction begins with pain and it ends with pain. And I think that's true. We have this pain we want to resolve, and then we become addicted and we get stuck and it's not working. And here we are in pain again. But I truly believe and know that there's a way out of that pain, that we truly can be pain-free. Now, of course, if we drink or we take a substance for a long period of time, we're going to get physically addicted to that substance, and it will require some kind of physical or medical detox. before we can even begin to address the problem from a psychological or a spiritual perspective, we have to be drug or drink or free. But ultimately, it is my belief that the process of recovery is looking within to resolve the issues we've been trying to solve by looking outward. That's it for me. That is really what recovery is about. We become comfortable inside first. And so I'd like to mention some of the sources that have informed my understanding of addiction and recovery. I'm a big fan of the work done by Dr. Kevin McCauley, who he was a guy who served as a naval flight surgeon in the Marine Corps, and he became addicted to opioids, and he spent some time in Leavenworth because of his addiction. But when he was released, he went into treatment, and then everybody began telling him that addiction was a disease, but they couldn't tell him exactly why it fit the disease model, and he was a physician, he wanted to know. So he made it his life's work to discover why and how addiction fits the disease model. I highly recommend his work. He did a movie called Pleasure Unwoven. If you've never seen it, it's wonderful. You can find it on YouTube. I think it's in little clips, but I'll give you a resource list for some of these things. It explains exactly why addiction fits the disease model and what that mechanism looks like. It turns out that the malfunction of the body is in the midbrain. And, I have a cursory understanding of his research and his findings, but he explains it much better than I ever could. So for sure, he's a wonderful resource. I'm also a big fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. And he'll probably sneak into the discussion as we move along. He's done lots and lots of research on what's happening in our brains from a neurological perspective and how we create repetitive patterns of thinking, firing the same neurons over and over again, and how those neurons form neural pathways. He talks about Hebb's law that says what fires together wires together. And as we repeat those same thought patterns, we activate the limbic system that then sends out hormones that create feelings that match our thoughts. And eventually we create this thinking and feeling loop that teaches our body a new way of being that is familiar, and our body literally becomes our mind, and it becomes habitual. And we could say that we become addicted to it. And his work is powerful because he also teaches practical skills to change this repetitive pattern that we've created, and that can be powerfully useful in our recovery, because if we created an addiction, we can interrupt that process and create an addiction to something wonderful and healthy. So today, I'd really like to focus on the first step of the 12 steps. I'm sure that you probably have all seen the 12 steps. If not, they're easy to find online. There's a book of 12 steps in the 12 traditions from AA. But it's my personal opinion that within each of these 12 steps, a spiritual principle is embedded. If we look at the origins of AA and the 12-step tradition in general, we know that it was definitely designed to be a spiritual program. Its roots are with the Oxford group, which was definitely a Christian fellowship, and they taught spiritual solution. They went so far as to say it was a spiritual revelation that was the key to recovery. So I truly do believe that the 12 steps work because their principles are in accord with universal truths, the same spiritual truths that I teach as a metaphysician. The 12-step structure empowers us with the freedom to change. And I've found that they apply to every life situation across the board, no matter what it is. If it's something as serious as heroin addiction, or something as what seems innocuous as always having to look on your phone or see how many likes you got on Facebook, whatever it is, it applies across the board. It's a structure that you can rely on and it will never let you down. And the steps are designed to be independent of personalities or human vulnerabilities and foibles, but to stand on these unchangeable principles that they're based on. You know, when I was an elementary school teacher, I believed that it was my job to create an environment where learning could take place. It had to be a safe, reliable, consistent environment where children felt free to learn and to play and to be themselves. Freedom within structure. That's what I believe we have in these 12 steps. And that's why they work, because they give us freedom within structure. We can always count on them to give us an unchangeable structure, to be free within this structure, to transform and to grow in a safe environment, just like my classrooms were. So as you probably know, the traditional first step reads, and I'm not going to show slides on this recording, but the first step from AA reads, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. What I take from this is the jumping off place. This is where transformation begins, when we acknowledge where we are and we decide to use where we are as a jumping off place for something better. We make a commitment to move out of the level of the problem and open ourselves up to a solution, which is continued in step 2. But for today, we'll focus on step 1, which is when we acknowledge that where we are isn't working. And to the best of our ability, we acknowledge this without judgment. We don't beat ourselves up, without commentary, trying to explain why we got here, or without attachment to the outcome or to what's next. We have to let go of our attachment to the pain of the past and just be clear and honest and acknowledge, here I am, and this is not working. So my version of the first step of the 12 steps is, I admit that I am powerless over my disease at the level of my disease. When I look for something outside myself to make me feel better, then I am disempowered, because there is no solution out there. I'm kind of ad-libbing now, but there is a solution within. And I'll share these with you. So I believe that we cannot solve any problem at the level of the problem. We cannot become prosperous if all we think about and the only way we live is in lack and limitation. We cannot have peace in our life if our life is overcome and with confusion and drama. And we can't become whole if we are living at the level of our disease, if that is all we see and that is all we feel is the level of this disease. The first step gives us an opening, a place to move into. We become honest and we become willing, and we open ourselves up to the possibility of change. Things can get better. I believe they can get better. And this step is grounded in the spiritual idea that our thoughts are creative. And, you know, I may lose you here a little bit, but bear with me. That thoughts can show, you know, that thoughts actually have some part in changing our lives. You know, thoughts show up randomly, you know, and they often do that. They just kind of pop in and we think. You know, and they often come along with the cravings that we have for alcohol or drug abuse or anything else that we're familiar with, and we think we need to be, quote unquote, normal. So thoughts just pop in, but thoughts can be intentional. We can intentionally focus on a particular thought. And we can create that thought in our lives over and over. And as I said before, we can create those new neural pathways. You know, and I'm not just pulling this out of the hat. There is some scientific background for this, some scientific basis. There's the word I was looking for. In quantum physics, there's something called the observer effect. And that tells us that when an observer focuses on a wave of potential, because we now know that space is not empty, it is filled with waves of potential or an idea. If we focus on that, it drops into a particle, from a wave of potential to a particle. And in our daily life speak, that is an experience. We'll talk more about this as we move along as well, because I just kind of threw a bunch of stuff at you, and I definitely will have to make that more clear. So in today's meeting, I really want to open it up for discussion after my presentation. And I'd love to hear what you have to say about your first step and what your experience has been, or if you'd like to ask me or the group any questions, that's good too. Or, you know, because maybe you're just acknowledging for the first time that you have a problem. Or maybe you're like me and you have to acknowledge every day that when you function at the level of the dis-ease, of the problem, you are disempowered, you are powerless, and that your life is bound to become unmanageable, but that you have the option to focus at the level of change, at the level of possibility, that something else can occur, and that your life can get better, and that you can be free from the pain. I'm not, again, it's never going to be perfect because stuff comes up and that's how we grow. But we know that at the level of our disease, we are lost and we are powerless. So I'm gonna stop here, stop the recording here. And when you join the actual online Zoom call group, there is where we'll have our discussion. Thank you so much.